Welcome back to Burning River Bushcraft. Today we're going to be making a compact trapping kit that's going to fit inside a fully loaded 70-serving emergency long-term food kit from Valley Food Storage. The 70-serving food kit from Valley Food Storage is not just backpack meals. This is not something that I'm going to get and take out camping. This is insurance. This is long-term food for me and for my family. Each one of these buckets represents a week's worth of food for a family. Now, if I just grabbed one of those buckets and head out the door on my own, that's a month. So I'm looking at 3 months worth of food for myself or 3 weeks for my family. They come in square buckets and everything's all set, ready to go. I don't have to worry about, do I have dinners? Do I have all breakfast? Is this a protein bucket? These are emergency food. When you're grabbing these, things are not going quite as planned. I can grab 2 of these, head out the door. If I've got family members with me and they've got spare hands, guess the first thing we're grabbing? It's going to be food so we can stay out there even longer. And these buckets, as great as they are, they're not completely packed from the factory. This is a pretty good example of it. So I've got about 6 inches of room in here. And the buckets themselves are about 9 by 9. Now, that's nice in case I'm looking for something specific. It's not so jam-packed. As soon as I open it, I got things popping out at me. But I can utilize this room to pack items that I would actually need in an emergency. So in a previous video, I took this 6-inch deep 9 by 9 space and I put an entire mobile food kitchen in here. So that would be the first bucket I would grab. If I was only going to grab one, I'm going to grab the bucket that's got everything I need to cook any food. I had water purification. I had this thing all set. You can check the link in the description for that. But for my second bucket, I'm thinking more long term. I'm thinking if I run out of food in here, if I only had room for 2 buckets, or if I had 3 buckets, or things went longer than I planned, I'm going to put a trapping kit in here. Now, I am a trapper. I also teach survival trapping classes. So if you're interested in that, I can put a link in the description. I teach a conibear trapping class on Outdoorcore, and that is dealing specifically with survival. So I know if I put enough traps in here in this little bit of space, I can feed myself indefinitely. When a lot of people think about trapping, this is the first thing you're thinking of. This is a foothold trap, or a leg hold trap as they used to be called. And this is a double spring. This would work fine, but this is not my first choice for a survival trapping kit. This requires a little bit extra equipment, but this would definitely work if this is what you had. Instead of carrying a long spring trap, we're going to be carrying these. This is a conibear, or a body grip style trap. And these things are like completely flat nearly. So you see how many more I can store. And I don't have to bed traps. I'm not using any type of bait with this, although I can. I can use this for small game, medium game. I can catch fish, I can catch frogs, I can catch turtles. Anything that goes in this trap is going to go in my pan. Here's our conibear open and ready for business, and these are available in multiple sizes. I'm not going to muddy this video down on how to trap. This is just what kind of trapping gear you can fit in a small bucket like that. But when an animal goes through this is going to be sitting on a trail, it's going to set that trap off, and the dinner bell has rung. So in addition to conibears, this is a modern cable snare. So this is not anything we're making out of picture wire. This is a legitimate professional grade locking snare. So this is going to work similarly to a conibear. There's no bait, there's minimal setup with this. You're going to put this on a trail. The animal is going to go down, and when it closes, a snare locks into place. It doesn't reopen. I have to relax the lock to get this to open. So obviously, between those flat conibears and these really thin, really small snares, I can pack a lot of trapping equipment that's going to supply a lot of food. You can see this bucket's not completely full. I could fit quite a bit more in here if I was interested in tucking stuff in every corner, but I want this to be usable. And I don't quite have everything I need in here. I would add a spool of trapping wire, and you can get that at any hardware store. Just 14 gauge wire would be sufficient. If I could get 11 gauge, I would be kind of happy with that too. I also don't have my conibear safety tool. That's in another bag with another piece of equipment. So A conibear safety tool is something I always use, especially with the big conibears. That's just something that's standard. You can pick those up anywhere, but if you're going to be setting conibears, you need to be having a safety tool as well. So I'm going to pull these smaller items off the top, and I'll go over them in just a second. It's kind of boring to see them out of context. So I've got around a dozen snares in there, and I've got a half a dozen conibears of different sizes. So this is the number 110 conibear. So this is the smallest one that you're going to encounter on a regular basis. This is the one that I just set and fired. So this is going to work for rabbits, squirrels, fish, frogs. You can stretch these in a larger game, but anything from possum down would be my intended target with this size trap. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 of these traps. These are the most versatile traps. This would fold up and fit in your coat pocket. This thing, if I was only going to take one trap, I would take the 110 conibear. If you're new to trapping, start with the 110 conibears. With the small conibears out of here, you can see I've got a dozen of different size locking cable snares. So I've got 2 small game snares, and this is cable. This is not picture wire. That's a big difference. So I've actually got a lock on here. I've got a swivel. This is my standard snare size, and I've got 7 of these. So this standard size snare, I train this ahead of time to a certain opening. You see how it's got this nice perfect circle, and that's exactly what you want. Now, the lengths on these are the same, but I do have different size circles. I can retrain them in the field, but it's best to set one snare to a certain size and keep it there forever. Now, this will handle any game coyote size and under. I would prefer a larger snare for coyote, but this is going to work just fine if I had to use it. This is a really good example. This is the exact same size snare, and you see I've got one trained. This is more for a skunk or a rabbit size. This is for a larger raccoon. This would also work for a coyote, so this is going to be the bigger of the normal size snares that I use. And this is kind of on the smaller end. So I've got varying sizes depending on what kind of game I'm after. These are my big game snare. This is something if I was targeting hogs, if I was targeting coyotes, or even deer in an absolute emergency, this is what I would go with. This part of the snare is called the lock, and that's what lets the cable close one direction and not open the other. This is my standard lock I use. And this is a cam lock. So this is a cam lock. This is a more aggressive lock. These have a pretty good chance of dispatching the animal. So you see how big that loop is. This would be sized for a hog or for a coyote. And in a true emergency, you could catch a deer with one of these pretty easy. So I've still got a couple big traps in here. And this first one, this is a 160. So a 160 is a 6-inch conibear trap. And right away you can see I've got double springs. If you compare this big 160 to the 110, you can see this is around 4.5 inches and I've got a single spring. This is around 6 inches and I've got a double spring. So this trap, once I get to a double spring trap at that point, I don't use these unless I have a conibear safety tool with me. And this trap will kill anything that puts its head inside it. This is going to work great for raccoons, great for groundhogs, any of that medium-sized game, possum, anything around that size, this is going to put in the pot. And the last one is my favorite by far. This is the 220. So this is an even bigger trap yet. This is a 7-inch trap. So here's the 6-inch trap. So this 160 hits with 160 pounds of force. The big 220, that's 220 pounds of force. So this will break your fingers. That's why I do not use these without a safety tool. There's safeties already on them. You see I've got a safety holding that spring closed. But again, I do not set these. I do not mess with the big traps without a conibear safety tool. So these big 220s, this will get you into raccoons a lot easier. They have a better chance of going through this larger opening. If you could get a coyote to put its head in here, it would do that. Anything that would stick its head through this 220 is going to be dead. So if you remember, I pulled some support equipment out of the bucket and kind of set it to the side. I always carry a pair of linesman's pliers. So these linesman's pliers are going to come in really handy for cutting wire primarily, but also for twisting wire off, for making my snare supports. These are going to be invaluable when you're out there. Now, I also have a small little tape dish. So in this tape dish, I've got S-hooks, I've got nails for securing traps, I've got staples for anchoring traps. There is snare buttons here as well, so I can use this to rebuild a snare. So these are small, these are invaluable when you're out there, and they just don't take up much space. So my last item in here, this is a rope, and what I use this rope for is for rope setting my conibear traps. So I've got a foot loop in this already. So if you're not familiar with rope setting a conibear trap, I go over it on my YouTube channel. I also cover it in detail in my Outdoorcore course on survival conibear trapping. So I've got a step here, I've got a loop I can step my foot in, I can slide this around. This is a safety device as much as anything else. If I were to get hung up in one of my own traps, I can get myself free just one hand using this rope. So a trapping kit like this is not for everybody, I understand that. But I have a 9-inch by 9-inch by 6-inch deep space in all of my buckets. And wherever I go, these buckets are coming with me. So it just makes sense for me to have one set up as a dedicated kitchen bucket. I can have a trapping bucket, I can have a fishing bucket, I can build first aid, I can do hunting. I can do a whole lot with these buckets. It's space that is just wasted. So I might as well use it for storage. And I know it's going to be with me when times get bad. So some of these traps got some wire triggers, and you got to be careful not to puncture any of your food. That's the last thing you need, is to have food that's going to last longer than I'm going to last, and have a hole poked in it, and then you're taking life away from that food. So when I pack this, I make sure my triggers are up. If you wanted to lay down a piece of leather or a piece of canvas or a piece of rubber sheeting, that's probably not the worst idea in the world. But you might as well use that space, and you might as well have a kit that's able to feed you when you run out of buckets. Till next time, this has been Jamie Boggs with Burning River Bushcraft. See you soon.